Imagine if the leader of Hamas had been taken out a year ago. What would the conversation look like? What would the conversation sound like? Imagine if the leader of Hamas had been taken out a year ago and Benjamin Netanyahu turned around and said, I've hardly started. I want to kill at least 40,000 more people in Gaza, and then I'm going to turn my attention on Lebanon. I don't know. It's a counterfactual. If the world could have turned around and said, you can't, maybe it would have carried a little bit more weight, because the world has turned around and said you can't a million times now, and Benjamin Netanyahu has replied in the strongest of terms, oh, yes, I can. Oh, yes, I can. IV drips, I think. You're so mean to me sometimes. You try doing this every single day without any notes or scripts. Of course I'm going to misspeak occasionally. Obviously not an IVF drip. It's an IV drip. I'm happy to clarify. Because then I turn my attention to another story about 10 Likud members of parliament, MKs, members of the Knesset. And if I told you this a year ago, how would you have responded? All right, so the troops are going into Gaza. The death toll is ticking up now. The children are dying. The people are being displaced. It's all justifiable because hostages and elimination of Hamas and human shields. Almost a third of lawmakers in Benjamin Netanyahu's party, including 10 of his party's MPs, are to participate in an event organised by a settlement movement which is calling for, it's an ultra-nationalist march, calling for the settlement of Gaza. The conference is titled Preparing to Resettle Gaza, and the goal is moving Israeli people into territory vacated forcibly by Palestinians. That is a rally set to be attended by the Social Equality Minister in Israel. Let me say that again. The Social Equality Minister is slated to attend a rally that will encourage Israelis to steal the land and the homes of forcibly relocated, or if you prefer, ethnically cleansed, or quite possibly murdered Palestinian civilians. The Social Equality Minister is going. Other members of the Knesset include Avishai Boiron, Sasson Guetta, Tali Gottlieb, Eli Dalal, Nissim Vachuri, Hanok Milwitsky, Ariel Kolner, Kati Shitrit, and Osher Shkalim. It is organised by an organisation that advocates for Jewish settlement in the West Bank, where it has also already helped establish, and this is an irrefutable linguistic description, illegal settlement outposts. Illegal settlement outposts. So on the day that we discover Israel has thankfully removed the leader of Hamas from the map, we discover that members of Benjamin Netanyahu's government are planning to spend their weekend calling for land forcibly vacated through relocation, ethnic cleansing, or death, whatever you prefer. Members of the government, 32 lawmakers in Benjamin Netanyahu's party, 10 of them are attending, including one cabinet minister, and 2 others we can roundly conclude will be broadly supportive of the whole plan, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. So, I don't know how many times we can sit here and ask, how does it end? Because they keep telling us. How will it end? What's that you say? A third of the governing party, a third of the lawmakers in Benjamin Netanyahu's government are going to be marching this weekend in support of moving settlers into Gaza, into the bombed out remains of what was once a pretty unpleasant and a hideously overpopulated area, but at least one where you didn't run the certain risk of being killed if you stayed put. They're going to move in there. Extraordinary. Janet has been in touch. She says, if James doesn't stop his anti-Israel rhetoric, he will stir up a tsunami of hatred towards the Jewish community in the UK. Janet's just listened to exactly the same words that you've just listened to. Janet's just listened to me. I don't want to use the word celebrating, but I will. Celebrating the elimination of the leader of Hamas, mourning the continuing carnage of Palestinian civilians, and condemning the decision by 10 members of Benjamin Netanyahu's government to essentially not even essentially, to quite deliberately demand that the land vacated by many of the dead Palestinians be occupied illegally by Israelis. But Janet has heard anti-Israel rhetoric and warns that it will stir up a tsunami of hatred towards the Jewish community in the UK. Janet, you've put your surname there. I don't think it would be fair of me to read it out. But do you honestly think the entire Jewish community in the UK is in favour of more illegal occupations, is in favour of more death in Gaza, in Lebanon, more schools being bombed, more hospitals being immolated, more people burning alive while attached to IV drips? Because if you're saying that, I'm afraid you're in danger of whipping up a tsunami of hatred towards the Jewish community in the UK. But thankfully, I'm here to tell everybody listening to this programme that that is not the case. Regardless of your faith, your ethnicity, your background, or your religion, millions of people will be utterly repulsed by what we're watching. But the question, of course, of what happens next is a question that people like Janet don't want people like you to answer. Because what happens next is what they're telling us will happen next. What happens next is contained within this quote on the WhatsApp channel ran by the organisation running this protest, set to be attended by a third of the flipping government. And that statement is this: victory is settlement. It is doable. Now, even if this were a handful of fringe extremists, even if this were, we know that at least one member of the cabinet has terrorist convictions. We know exactly where Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich come from and where they dream of being. We know that, and they're in the heart of government. But even if they weren't, even if no politicians were involved in this, if a popular movement within Israel was calling for the settlement of Gaza, victory is settlement, it is doable, you'd still be a little bit reluctant because of people like Janet to have a conversation about whether that's actually the plan. But when it's a third of lawmakers, when it is, and they're the ones that are turning up, how many people will be privately or silently supportive of it without yet being ready to add their name, add their face to the list of lawmakers in the heart of Israel's government describing settlement of Gaza as victory, describing ethnic cleansing as doable, describing a second Nakba as the mission? 03456060973. That's the number you need, James. James O'Brien is anti-Semitic and a disgrace to broadcasting. Sack him now. James has listened to exactly the same broadcast that you've listened to. Again, you provide your surname, but I won't read it out. It might make you identifiable. I'm sure you'd be safe, but you're the ones warning against repercussions for a simple description of what is happening. Tens of thousands of people are dead. Hospitals are being bombed. Schools are being attacked. People are being set on fire. And the governing party, a third of the governing party, is planning on spending this weekend calling for the cleansed territory to be occupied illegally by Israelis. And you think that there's something anti-Semitic about describing the truth, the facts. Whew. So is this going to change anything? A year ago, a headline describing the mastermind of Hamas being killed by IDF troops would have prompted celebration, relief, and hope. Celebration that this murderous maniac had been taken off the map, relief that the prospect of Israel's response being worse than the original provocation was in retreat, and hope that the civilian death toll caused, and many would say necessitated, by the October the 7th terror attack would end up being considerably lower than it might otherwise have been. So here we are, almost 50,000 deaths in, the leader of Hamas taken off the map, and unless you have got some brilliant arguments and some profound insights and some very clever comments to make, the grim and hideous conclusion that this is not going to change anything. And the bigger story today is not the killing of Yahya Sinwar, The bigger story today is 1/3 of Benjamin Netanyahu's closest allies describing settlement as victory and planning to spend their weekend calling for the cleansed territory of the Gaza Strip to be occupied illegally by Israelis. Go on, call me now and tell me I'm wrong.